Hi there, and welcome back to Sky Skill Up Introduction to JavaScript course. And in this lesson, we'll be building a simple calculator web app. Now, this calculator web app, just like every other calculator, can perform simple arithmetic operations. For instance, if I click on 3 times 3, and I click on equals to, we're getting 9. I can say 9 divided by 6, we're getting 1.5. I can say, then when I click on AC, it takes it back to 0. So let's go straight to our VS Code and build this project together. For this project, I'll be placing JavaScript internally in our HTML file. But before we do anything, let's set up our HTML first. So I'll create my HTML element. I'll create the head element. I'll create the body element. Then in between the head element, I will create the title and call it calculator. Then directly in the body, I am going to create a div, and that div is going to have a class of container. Then below that div, I will create a heading with a content that says model 1.0. And after that, I am going to create an input with a type of text and a placeholder of 0. So this input, I want it to be read only because I don't want anybody to type any text inside of it. So I'm going to give this input an ID of result. Then after that, I'm going to place a breaking tag. Then below this element, I'm going to create a button. And this button is going to have a value called AC. And it's going to have a class of AC. And then I'll create another button for the division, multiplication, and addition. This button is going to come with a class of upper. So I'm going to give this one a class of upper. Same thing goes for this. Then after that, I'm going to place in my breaking tag. And below the breaking tag, I'm going to create a couple other buttons. This one will be for 1. This one will be for 2. This one will be for 3. And the last button will be for addition. I can give this a class of upper, just like this section. I'm going to do the same for 4, 5, 6. So let me just copy these buttons that I have right here, and I'll make it 4, 5, 6. And this one is going to have and this is going to have a button with a minus key. It will still come with a class of upper. And then after breaking it, I'll create a couple other buttons for 7, 8, and 9. So this one will be for 7, I've created the one for 8 and the one for 9. So I'm going to place my breaking. So after placing my breaking tag, I'll create more buttons. This one will be for 0. This one will be for decimal point. And this button is going to be for equals to. So it's going to have a class of upper. Now when I save my code and go straight to my browser, first and foremost, I'll click on go live. And when it takes me straight to my browser, you can see the button that we created with just HTML. So we have all the keys right here from 1 all the way to 9. We have our arithmetic operators like the plus, the minus, the equals to. I should change this to minus. I should change this to division. So when I go to my code, I'm going to change this. I'm going to change the key to division, and when I save it and go straight to my browser, you can see that it has reflected directly in my browser. You'll also notice that this input field is a read-only input field. So as you can see, I can't type anything inside of it. Now let's go to our CSS and style this calculator that we built right here. So going over to our CSS, first and foremost, I would style the body elements, give it a padding of none, a margin of none, a background color of hashtag 3 hash 3A4452. Then after that, we're going to align the item to center. Now, before I proceed, I would link that style to my HTML file. So all I will do here is that I will come here and give it a rel of style sheet and come here and say href style.css. So I'm going to link this style.css to my index.html file. So moving on, the next thing I want to style is this container right here. So I will come here and I'll select the container. I'll give the container a padding of 10 pixels. I'll give it a margin of none. I will align every content to the center. I'll justify the content to center. And I'll give this element a background color of hash 29303A. Now I'm going to give this element a border radius of 20 pixels. And this element is going to be positioned absolutely. So I'll position it 4% from the top and 3% from the left. The next element that I'm going to style is going to be our button. So I'm going to select the button by tag. I'm going to select the button by tag name, and I'm going to give it a margin of 8 pixels. I'll justify the content to the center by 50%. Then I'm going to give the element a border of none. So basically, I'm going to remove the border. Then after that, I am going to give the element a width of 60 pixels. give it a height of 60 pixels, and I'm going to give the element a font size of 15 pixels and 3A4452. Below that, I'm going to give the element a box shadow of -2 pixels, -2 pixels, 6 pixels, and then black. Before I do anything, I'll first of all give this element a universal selector, and I will make all margin to be 0, all padding 0. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the change that I have made. So you can see the change that I've made. Now, to make the buttons come out a little bit, to make the color a little bit brighter, I will change this to orange. So I want the color to be orange. I don't want it to be gray. And when I go back to my browser, you can see that we have that bright orange color. We'll be working on this input right here. Go straight to our VS Code and we're going to select that input element. So in our CSS, we're going to select the element by tag name, and we're going to give that element a padding of 15 pixels. We're going to give it a width of 260 pixels. And after that, we're going to make the margin 15 pixels on the top, 15 pixels on the right, 25 pixels on the bottom, and 15 pixels on the left. Then after that, we're going to give the element a text align property of right. We're going to align that element to the right. Then we're going to give that element a border of 2 pixels, and we want the border type to be solid and the color to be white. Then below that, we'll give that element an outline property of none. And below that, we're going to give it a font width of bold. We also want to give our element a font size of 18 pixels. And we want to give it a font family of Sego UI. So for this element, we want the background of our element to be transparent, and we want the border to be none. And I am going to add a box shadow to this element. So I'm going to give it -2 pixels, -2 pixel, 6 pixel, black. Then I'm going to give the element 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 6 pixels, black. Then I'm going to give that element a color of white. You can see the result of everything that I typed. So you can see the result of our code. Moving on, I will style the placeholder of that input. So I will give the placeholder a color of white, basically a white color. Then below that, I will give it a font width of bold, and I would increase the size to 18 pixels. Now when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that the placeholder is now white, bold, and it's 18 pixels. So if I increase it here, let's say I make it 38. Let's say I make it 38 and I save my code, you see that it got bigger. So let me just reduce it to 18. Now the next thing we want to style is the heading. So we want to give our heading. So we want to align our heading to the right, and we want to give it a color of silver. We want to add some spacing to the right. Let's say we want to give it like 12 pixels spacing, and that element is going to have a font family of Sego UI. Now, to make things a lot easier, I can take out this font family here, take out this font family here, and I'll go straight to my body and place that font family of Sego UI. That way, every element is going to make use of this property. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the change that has been made. Now moving on, we'll be styling this upper class that we have right here. Now I'll go back to my CSS and I will style this upper class and I'll give it a background color of hash 2e tc71. Once I save my code and go back to my browser, you can see the result of my code. And that reminds me, there's supposed to be a sign here, like a square root sign. So I'll go back to my HTML file and I will set up that square root sign. So it should be a button, and the button should have a class of upper, and it should have, see that we have that square root symbol placed in our web app. Now going over to our CSS, I will style the button and give it a hover property. So I'm going to give it a property of animation, and I want it to scale 0.09 seconds, linear 1. And below that, I'm going to set up my keyframes. So I will come here and say keyframe scale, and what I'm going to do is on that animation at 0% of the animation, it's going to transform, it's going to scale from 1.0 all the way to 0.9 and then 1.0. So that's for 0%. Then 50% transform scale as 0.9, then 100%. So as you can see, what we have right here is just a simple animation when this button is being hovered on. So you can see right here, this is just a simple animation using CSS, which allows you to increase the size of the button at 0% and then reduce the size of that button at 50% of the animation. And going back to 100%, the size of the button goes back to its original position. The size of the button goes back to 1. Now when I go straight to my browser, you'll notice that when I hover on this button, it goes inside and then pops out, as you can see right here. One more thing we have to style is the AC button. So in my CSS, one more thing we have to style is this button that has AC. So in my CSS, I will come here and say .ac, and I'll give it a background color of red, and I'll give it a color of white. Just simple styling. So when I go back to my browser, you can see that the color of this changed. The color and the background color rather became different. As you can see, it's red and white, while the rest have green and orange. So now that we're done with the CSS and the HTML part of this project, let's switch over to JavaScript. And for this project, we'll be working with JavaScript internally. So to work with JavaScript internally, all we need to do is to go to the bottom section of our HTML document, and we specify our script tag. So in between the script tag, in between the script element, I will create a variable called result, and this variable is going to hold the result element. So I'm going to get the element by ID, and I'm looking for a result. So below this result, I'm going to create a couple of functions, and one of them is the show function. So the purpose of this show function right here is to add the current value of this result with the new number that you have right here. So this show function will be mostly used in all these buttons like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the next function that we're going to create is going to be our show operator function. Show operator function, and we're going to pass in operator right in here. So I can come here and say result.value is equals to result.value plus operator. So just like this function is also doing almost the same thing. So moving on, we're going to create the calc function, and the function is responsible for performing mathematical operation. So I can come here and say result.value is equals to eval result.value. To test everything that I've done, all I need to do now is to add these functions directly to this element that I've created here. So I'm going to place them in this element as an attribute. So I will come here and I will give this element. First of all, I will call the onClick attribute. Then I'm going to call the show operator function. I'm also going to do the same thing here, and also on this section. So the function is expecting an attribute. So in between this section, I would place the value that is to be expected. So it's expecting this one is expecting a multiplication, this one is expecting a percentage, and this one is expecting a division. So going to this section, I'll create an onClick attribute, and this one is going to be show. I'm going to pass in just a value. I'm going to pass in 1 year. So I'm going to do the same thing for all the numbers that I have right here, all the buttons holding a number. So I'll change this to 2, I'll change this to 3. I'll do the same thing for this section. And I'll make here 4, I'll make here 5, I'll make here 6, and I'll make here 5. So I'll come over to this section and I'll make here 7, I'll make here 8, and I'll make this section 9. So when I save my code and go so when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the result of everything that I've done. So you can see that we have this. As we are clicking on numbers, it's adding more and more values. Now let's add in this on click attribute to this. It's what 00 here. We'll add 0 here, and on this section we're going to add dot. Now I'll be doing the same thing for operators. So for this section, any operator I see, I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'll make some few changes. So just like this operator, I'm going to add click event handler, and I'm going to do the same thing here and change it to minus. So I changed this one to plus, I changed this one to minus. This one is going to be square root. Then this one would be equals to. So when I save my code, you can see the changes that is going on. You can see the changes that is going on. So moving on, I would then call this function directly on this equals to button. So what I'm going to do here is that I am going to call the calc function. And when I save my code, I can come here and say 5 times 3. When I say equals to, we're getting 30. Then if I say 39, then when I say 8 minus 6, if I say equals to, we're getting 2. So one more thing that we have to do is to work on this button. So whenever I click on this button, it's expected that it should clear the result. So the next thing I'm going to focus on is going to be on this AC button. So when I click on this button, it's expected to clear the results or whatever we have right here. So when I go straight to my browser, I will create another function, and that function I will call it clear results. So that function is expected to return the value of the result to an empty string. And when I call that function on this section, clear result, when I save it and type anything I want to type, once I click on AC, it should take it back to an empty string. So the reason why you're seeing 0 here is because of the placeholder. So this placeholder has a value of 0. Next thing that we're going to work on is on this square root right here. So when they click on square root, for instance, when I click on 4 and this square root symbol, it should give me the square root of 4. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create a function that will calculate the square root. So I can come here and say calculate square root, and I will say the result dot value is equals to math dot square root and I would say result dot value, or rather. So I'll come here and pass in the value. So I will create that function and I'm going to call the function here calculate square root, and directly inside this function I can say result dot value. But instead of doing that, I could make it a lot more easier by passing in result dot value right here. So moment I click on 9 and this, you're seeing that we're getting 3. So when I cancel it and click on 81 and I press this button, you can see that we're getting 9. We have successfully created our own calculator web app with extra functionalities like the square root functionality, and we're able to like style it to look visually appealing to the eyes. Thank Now you can see how important and useful JavaScript is when it comes to making your apps fully functional. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next project.